Hello everyone! So I'm finally getting my card done for this week's Color Throwdown Challenge, which was two colors technically. It was blue and green and white. So I pulled out my Simon Says Stamp Sketch Ranunculus stamp set that I haven't used in forever that I love. And I don't think I've ever used this set and stamped it in black. I always heat emboss it. That's just my go-to with this set. So I thought I would do something different for me lately, and yeah, I'm stamping the images with versafine onyx black ink onto some Canson XL watercolor paper, and I decided to use my Misty because I'm stamping on the textured side of this. I do get asked that a lot if I'm using the textured side or the smooth side. Honestly, with this, there's not a huge difference, and I just like textured side. So I wanted to make sure I didn't mess up with the stamping. So I used my Misty for everything, and I did a bunch of masking. I kept all the masks from this set that I had made months and months ago. I just keep them stuck to actual little like sheet that the stamps come on. That way I don't have to keep recutting masks every time I use it, even though with a set like this, it takes seconds to make masks for because there's just the outlines are simple images. But I stamped a cluster of flowers and then leaves and some little like kind of branch elements and whatnot of this set along the bottom corner. And then I stamped some along the upper corner. And I used my Misty as well because I wasn't sure in the beginning how much off the paper I was going to stamp. But after making this, it was like I could have used my mini Misty, no problem. And this piece of paper, by the way, this watercolor paper, it's 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. I just cut it to the size of an A2 card. And then, yeah, like I said, the color challenge this week is just the two colors, blue and green. So I actually watercolor all these images with two colors. I just used my Clean Color Real Brush markers, and I used Persian blue for the flowers. And I usually use my little H2O water brush, you know, the yellow one that I show in all my videos. And just recently I got my hands on, this is a Sakura Koi water brush. So I thought I would try it out. I honestly still prefer the H2O in just, I don't know, it's just personal preference. It has a shorter bristle on the brush. It's very fine tipped. This one has a much longer bristle, so I don't know if that's a bonus or not, but once I got a little more used to it, I kind of like it, but I still just prefer my little yellow H2O one. It just, I've used it so much, I think, that I'm just so comfortable with it. But this is still a good alternative as well. So once I was done all of the watercoloring, so I just scrolled it on. I did super speed this up because it's just simple. I just scribble on the color with the marker and then I pull it out with the water brush and that's it. And that's another reason I get asked a lot what paper, cardstock, watercolor paper, whatever I recommend with the Clean Color Real Brush because a lot of people recommend the Bristol Smooth. I don't mind the Bristol Smooth. It depends on what look I'm going for. But my go-to for a while now has been this Canson XL watercolor paper. I just find it works easier for me. I love how the colors just blend seamlessly. Like you can see here, I decided to add a little bit of shading. I'm just using green gray. And you can see how easy it is for me to just pull that color right out and fade it out into the paper with no lines. It just, the markers really move beautifully on the Canson XL and I love it for that. And also the Canson XL is cheap. in terms of watercolor paper and how expensive it can get, this stuff is, I think, like really cheap. You can get a great big huge pack of it for very little dollars. So after I was done all my watercoloring, made sure it was completely dry. I set this in my splatter cubby and then I'm just smushing a distress ink. I'm using Blueprint Sketch Distress ink here and I smush that onto an acrylic block. And then I just squeezed my water brush to get some water on there and then added a bit more ink because I wanted it a little bit darker. And then just mix that together with my water brush and then did a really light splatter. I didn't go overboard. Normally I would feel the need to use all that. But I just wanted to add a little bit of splatter just to kind of finish it off. And then again, let that dry. And then I grabbed some Simon Says Stamps. This is their green leaf cardstock. So I had 3 little pieces of this that I cut down to fit this sending die. This is an older die that they released quite some time ago that I still just love. I came across it the other day and it's just been in the front of my mind. I'm like, I need to use it. I want to use it on a card again. I just love it. I love the font. So I pulled it out for this card and I'm backing all these pieces of cardstock with some stickit adhesive. Because this particular die, it's so finely detailed that it's a little bit more of a pain. I usually, use my multimedia mat and apply that and then stack the layers. But I thought this time it'd probably be just easier to use the stickit. So I peeled off the backing paper and backed all these pieces with that stickit adhesive. And then you leave the release paper there in place. So got that all coated with the stickit, which again, I think I said that in another recent video. I don't use this very often. And then every time I pull it out, I'm like, oh yeah, that's why I bought this. I really like this stuff. So ran these through my machine and I went back and forth with all of them because when I'm cutting something so finely detailed and it's already backed with the adhesive, I like to run it through a few times just to make sure everything die cuts. So I'm not sitting there wrestling with it, trying to remove it from the scrap cardstock. So I die cut all of these the 3 times with that sending die. And then while I had my machine out, I grabbed the watercolor panel, which is now completely dry, and I'm running it through my machine with the largest die from Simon Says Stitched Rectangles set. So then I've got a nice little stitched edge and it cuts it to slightly smaller than an A2 size. It's roughly like 4 inches by 5 1/4, something like that. And then, like I said, it's got the stitching all around the outside edge. So once I did that, I'm going to stack these sentiments together. And that is something I really love about the stick adhesive is you have time and wiggle room. Like, it does not fuse the second you layer something together with this or the second you put it on your card or whatever. You have time, you can pull it up, you can move it around, you can play with it, make sure things are lined up, etc. It doesn't become permanent until you really press down. So that's something I really, really like about this. It's not super sticky either. Like, you know, you don't have that stickiness all over your fingers and the cardstock and that. But once you press this down, it's permanent. It's good to go. So I was able to stack all 3 of those sentiments really easily. And then I wasn't sure how I was going to add the second part of the sentiment. I was going to do vellum. And then I decided to stamp it onto some black cardstock. So I just grabbed a scrap from my stash and I'm just inking up this little sentiment from the Sending and Wishing stamp set, which coordinates with that die. So I stamped that with Simon Says clear ink and I treated the cardstock with my anti-static powder tool first. And then I'm using Ranger's ultrafine white embossing powder. I chose the ultrafine this time because this is a really tiny sentiment and I wanted the finest powder I had. So I heat that up with my heat tool till it's melted. Made sure to funnel the embossed powder back into the container and put the lid on because I do knock that over. It's happened a lot. So did that and then wiped off the excess anti-static powder with my fingers. And then I'm just using my paper trimmer and the wire in my paper trimmer to kind of line up that sentiment there so I can cut that down into a really thin little strip. And then I'm going to figure out where I'm going to place this on my card front. So once I was happy with where I wanted to put everything, I just used my scissors to trim off the ends, kind of eyeball it there, and then figure out where I'm going to put that sending sentiment so that I can trim off the other end of this. And then I'm just going to cut a little notch right down the center with the tip of my scissors. And then you cut each corner to meet the center of that notch. And then I've got a nice little flag end on that. And then I just decided to use my multimedia matte adhesive to adhere it because 1, it was a really narrow piece, and 2, I already had this out because I plan on adding sequins to this card, of course. So I'm going to adhere that down to the watercolor panel and then peel off the final backing of this sending die cut. And once I've got this backing peeled off, this is where I can fiddle a little bit and you can see I move it around. I hadn't fully pressed it down, so I'm able to lift it back up and kind of move it around and place this exactly how I want it to look on my card front. That's another nice thing too, is sentiments and just die cut images that are really finely detailed. A lot of times you can manipulate them a little bit without it, you know, tearing or anything. So did that, and then I kept the scrap piece so I could peel off the backing of the dot for the eye, and then I can line it right up over that die cut, and I press it into place with my craft pick. And then it's perfectly placed, saving me the agony of fiddling with it and getting it in the right spot. You know, first world problems. So for my card base, I decided to use the same green leaf cardstock. A lot of you guys comment on my last video when I used the yellow card base. Like, it made an impression, me using colored cardstock for my card base, which sounds a little bit silly. But if you watch a lot of my videos, you know I use white card bases 99% of the time for a long time now. So I was like, you know what, let's go outside the box again. Let's do something in color just to kind of pull it together. Plus, this is just such a pretty shade of green. So I cut the cardstock in half, standard A2 size card with a top fold. And then I pulled out my MISTI to stamp the sentiment on the inside. The sentiment is from the big scripty greeting set, and I wanted to make sure that stamped perfectly because it's a large sentiment. So I lined that up with my MISTI, stamped it with that same versafine onyx black, and then decided to add some of the little like branchy buds elements from that same sketch Ranunculus stamp set. And I'm just inking them up with this clean color real brush marker. And again, I've mentioned this in some videos. These markers are not meant for stamping, they're not good for it. They don't give you don't really get a smooth look with them, anything like that. But I like it for things like this, just because it's quick and simple. I don't have to grab an ink pad or anything, and it just works. But they aren't meant for that, just because of the nature of the style of marker. They're meant more for coloring than they are for stamping. But I do whatever I want. It works. So once I was done with the inside, I adhered that watercolor panel with foam tape, and then I pulled out these Studio Katia Crystal Clear Fusion sequins that I am in love with. They have this gorgeous like blue reflective element to them that is fabulous. So I arranged several of them. I was only going to add 3, but then I was like, no, I have to add more because they're just so pretty. So that is kind of the rule of thumb when adding things, is generally rules of 3, odd numbers, triangles. People have been asking me to give more advice on adding embellishments. Honestly, I don't really follow the rules to a degree. I just do what looks good to me anyway. So I added 3, and then I added 1 more under the sentiment, and I was happy with it. So that is my card for today. I will have links below the video to my blog post with links to all the supplies used, as well as a couple links to a couple other videos I did using the same stamp set, so you can check it out if you missed them. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will catch you guys very soon in another video. Bye!